J'ouvre maintenant la séance.
I call this meeting to order. Hello, everyone, and welcome to meeting number 35 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. We're very happy to see you here today, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee. On Wednesday, December 10th, 2025, the committee will resume its study of abuse and financial vulnerability of senior women. Today's meeting is taking place, as always, in a hybrid format, pursuant to the standing orders. Members can attend in person or remotely using Zoom. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of members and witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone. And please mute yourself when you are not speaking. At the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel, Floor, English, or French. For those of you in the room, you don't have to worry about the microphone. Someone in the IT team will take care of it. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. For those of you on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. Thank you for making yourselves available for us. Very much appreciated. First, from the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, Mr. James Gennaro, Director.
Francophone du Canada, Madame Joanne Dumas, Présidente.
The Fédération des Aînés francophones du Canada, Joanne Dumas, President, and with her is Norma Dubé. And she is with us online. And from the Single Seniors for Tax Fairness, Elizabeth Brown, Director. Welcome to our witnesses.
For 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Mesdames, Messieurs, bon matin. Merci pour l'opportunité.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak.
Pan-Canadian organization focused on caregivers such as parents, siblings, friends, neighbors, as well as care providers such as personal support workers and direct support professionals. We cover the full spectrum of care, from supporting children with disabilities to lifelong mental health challenges to aging to end-of-life care. Our goal is to make Canada the best place in the world to give and receive care of all sorts. The National Institute on Aging's recent 2025 Aging in Canada survey highlights what caregivers across Canada already know. Seniors are under growing financial pressure due to the cost of living crisis. 1 in 5 older Canadians is living at a poverty level standard, and women are more likely than men to report this finding. About 1/3 say that rising costs are their top concern. Troublingly, only 22% report having $5,000 or less saved for retirement. To put that in context, the average rent for a studio apartment in Toronto is about $1,900 a month. That means that nearly a quarter of older Canadians has saved enough to cover just 2.5 months of rent. This situation becomes even more urgent when the senior is also a caregiver for someone they love. 1 in 4 Canadians is currently a caregiver, and half of us will take on that role at some point in our lives. Of that, there are approximately 2.25 million female caregivers over the age of 50 in Canada today. Many are caring for aging spouses and often for extended periods. Nearly 70% of older female caregivers say they do not feel supported by their government. Their voices underscore the urgency. One caregiver told us, and I quote her directly, "I do not know who I am anymore, just a caregiver for my husband." End quote. Another said, quoting again, "There are too many barriers to accessing any sort of support as a caregiver." For these women, financial distress is one of the most pressing challenges they face every day. Nearly half report financial hardship as a direct result of their caregiving responsibilities. Many have stopped saving for retirement or have taken on debt to cover their expenses. Others have left the workforce entirely, reducing their income today and, in the long term, their retirement security in the future due to lower lifetime contributions to the Canada Pension Plan. Caregivers are asking for practical, meaningful solutions to these problems. The Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence has spent the last 3 years advocating for one particular key reform: converting the Canada Caregiver Credit into a refundable tax credit valued at $1,250, per year from this current non-refundable status quo. This would provide direct financial support to millions of caregivers, many of whom currently receive little to no benefit from the existing non-refundable credit. Importantly, ladies and gentlemen, this proposal has received support across party lines in previous general election campaigns. However, even this measure would be just a first step. More broadly, we call on the federal government to fulfill its commitment to develop a national caregiving strategy. Such a strategy would provide a coordinated framework to better support the millions of Canadians who provide care, including the 2.25 million older women at the heart of this discussion today and the focus of your study. Caregivers are essential to our health and social systems, as well as our productivity and long-term economic growth. Better is both possible and necessary. I look forward to your report on this important issue. Thank you for your time, and I welcome your questions.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Gennaro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gennaro. I will now pass the floor to Ms. Dumas. You have 5 minutes for your presentation. Yes, I think Ms. Dumas wasn't able to connect, Chair. So I will do her presentation. Madam Chair, members of Parliament, thank you for inviting us to contribute to your work on abuse and financial vulnerability of senior women and to help you identify ways to protect them in this area. The Fédération des aînés et aînés francophones du Canada represents more than 480,000 women and men aged 50 and over living in minority situations across the country. And when we listen to our members, one observation stands out whether it involves fraud or abuse. Violations of senior safety now take many different subtle and disturbing forms. In Canada, seniors are exposed to a great deal of fraud. In 2024, more than 108,000 incidents were reported, resulting in losses of $643 million. It's been estimated that only 5 to 10% of frauds are reported, so it is reasonable to believe that the true scale of the phenomenon is much higher. People aged 60 and over account for nearly 1/3 of victims. They file more reports and suffer higher financial losses than any other age group. The types of fraud are diversifying and becoming more sophisticated, ranging from phone scams and romance scams to technical support fraud, investment scams, and identity theft. According to StatsCan, almost 54% of people aged 65 and over have experienced a cybersecurity incident in 2022. Exposed seniors are to digital threats. Our member associations have shared. For example, one person received an email that perfectly impersonated a friend and mentioned a serious illness to request a small favor. Several $1,000s stolen. After using a public Wi-Fi network while traveling, and there are many other examples. Family abuse against seniors is also evolving. Since 2018, the rate of family violence against seniors has jumped by 49%. In 2024, police recorded 7,622 senior victims of family violence, or 98 victims per 100,000 people aged 65 and over. Women are still the most affected. In 2024, they represented 50% of the victims. Violence most often comes from close family members, and among senior women, often the aggressor is a child or a spouse. And added to this is also coercive control. It's a subtle form of domination, seeking to control the senior. It limits their autonomy, isolates them, and deprives them of their resources. This violence leaves no visible marks. It is psychological, sometimes financial, and develops over a long period. It's difficult to identify. Family violence is often kept silent. It is a challenge to get a senior to recognize that they are experiencing abuse or mistreatment, especially if it's at the hands of their spouse or one of their children. We've already accomplished a great deal to better protect seniors, but it's not enough, not yet. There's still work to be done. And for Francophones in a minority situation, the obstacles are more significant. Access to services in their language remains a challenge that gets more difficult with age, isolation, and increasing vulnerability. Behind every statistic and every testimony, there is a woman, a man, a story, a life. These lives deserve to be protected, respected, and supported in their language, in their culture, and with dignity. Francophone seniors in Canada are not asking for privileges. They're simply asking to be able to age with dignity, safely, and in French. Thank you for your attention, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. We'll be happy to answer your questions, and I see that Ms. Dumas was able to join us. That's great. Ms. Dubé, we had a few technical problems with your presentation. So someone from IT will contact you. So if your phone rings, please take the call just to make sure that everything is okay in terms of your ability to answer questions later.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to speak today on an issue of women's economic inequality that disproportionately affects older women in Canada. Single Seniors for Tax Fairness is a Canada-wide volunteer movement advocating for changes to the Federal Income Tax Act to correct systemic tax disadvantages faced by solo seniors, the majority of whom are women. By solo seniors, we mean those who are 65 plus, widowed, separated, divorced, or never married. One member of a senior couple will eventually be single through death or divorce. Women live longer, are more likely to initiate divorce, to be widowed, to live alone later in life, and to enter retirement with lower lifetime earnings because of wage inequity, caregiving responsibilities, and interrupted careers. Yet under our current tax system, a solo senior woman with the same income as a senior couple may pay dramatically more tax. MP Roberts raised this issue in the March 24th meeting. Using 2024 data at $50,000 in annual income, for example, a senior couple may pay only $600 in taxes, while a solo senior may pay $5,800, nearly 10 times more. This tax inequality affects all income levels for solo seniors, even as low as $30,000, as we illustrate in our speaking notes. These inequities in the tax system make solo seniors more financially vulnerable. Senior couples can lower their tax burden by splitting pension income and each claiming personal pension and age amount tax credits, and by transferring unused portions of these credits to the other spouse. All of this lowers their combined taxes payable and can allow their incomes to drop below the OAS and age amount clawback thresholds. Solo seniors do not have these tax advantages. Another tax inequity is the treatment of registered funds on death. Couples can roll over RSPs, RIFs to the surviving spouse, therefore reducing the tax burden. For solo seniors, the value is fully taxable as income in the year of death, plus part or all of the OAS received that year may be clawed back. Solos have less money to help their beneficiaries while alive, so this extra tax hit on death compounds the situation. Let me dispel a few misconceptions. First, there are some who would suggest that the current tax system is justified because a couple's income pays for two people. Solo and married seniors pay the same type of non-discretionary household expenses, mortgage, rent, utilities, insurance, property tax, maintenance, etc., which are comparable regardless of household size. There are no government programs or non-refundable amounts that provide remedies for the inequities that SSTF has identified. In previous correspondence, the Department of Finance has cited benefits like disability, home accessibility, multi-generational, caregiver, and attendant care non-refundable tax amounts, and the Canadian Dental Care Plan. However, these are also available to qualifying individuals regardless of age or marital status, and therefore these do not close the income tax gap inequities. Secondly, solo seniors are 4 times more likely to live in poverty than senior couples, according to the Auditor General's report called Programs to Assist Seniors. There was discussion in the March 24th meeting regarding challenges with using the Consumer Price Index to measure the impacts of inflation, a sentiment echoed by the Auditor General herself in the same report. There's another tool used to measure poverty that faces the same challenges, the market basket measure. These measures affect government policies but don't factor in the expenses more common to seniors. SSTF is not advocating for changes to senior couples' tax benefits. Instead, the SSTF calls upon the government to do the following for solo seniors: introduce a tax provision to compensate them for pension income splitting, increase the income clawback thresholds for old age security and the age amount non-refundable tax credit, implement a new non-refundable tax credit equivalent to half the person amount for a given tax year, increase the pension income amount from $2,000 to $3,000, amend the tax treatment of registered plan proceeds on the death of a solo senior to allow a tax-deferred rollover to any beneficiary with a maximum 10-year payout. This committee can play an important role in recognizing solo seniors of all income levels as a distinct stakeholder group and to make our voices heard. You can also recommend that the Department of Finance address the inequities embedded in the current tax system. Help us and other seniors organizations who've joined our campaign. The issue disproportionately affects older women and contributes directly to their economic vulnerability later in life. Canada's demographics have changed. Our tax system must evolve to reflect that reality. Retirement security should not depend on marital status. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Le moins qu'on puisse dire, c'est que nous avons des invités très disciplinés. Madame
Well, we can say that we have very disciplined guests with us today. Oh, we were told, Ms. Dubé, that the technical test wasn't done, but everything seems okay. So for our members, don't worry. It seems like everything's going to be okay. So we will start our discussions. Between our guests and our members, I would ask Ms. Roberts to take the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations on your new role. And I want to thank you, all the witnesses. I really appreciate your advocacy for seniors because it's a crucial issue that we have in our society. As we all know, seniors built this country, and we have the obligation to ensure that they live their life in dignity. So thank you for that. So my first question is going to be to James. James, you and I have spoken about this issue many, many times. And as you know, with the inflation situation currently, seniors are struggling. They're struggling because they cannot afford the basics that they need to survive. So when seniors on fixed income can barely afford rent and groceries, how can seniors that need assistance afford caregivers?
Thank you, Ms. Roberts, for your question. That's an excellent question. And off the bat, I'll say thank you for your ongoing support for caregiver issues across the country as well. This is a tough one. Our data show that seniors are less likely than other groups who are caregivers to actually access the kind of supports that they have access to. What limited supports they have access to. They're not exactly generous to begin with. One reason is digital issues and accessing stuff that's online, but the larger reason is the cost. And the simple cost of, say, hiring private support, like a paid care provider, such as a personal support worker, to come in and supplement relatively meager public provision for those same services. The result of that is actually situations a lot like my own, to drop in my grandmother into this conversation, situations like my own grandmother, where she was the long-term caregiver to my late grandfather. He was in his 90s. She was in her late 80s. Not exactly a young, fit woman in her own right, but she was the primary caregiver for him. When the PSWs were not able to turn up, either she was dealing with or I was getting the phone call and driving as fast as I could to get there. But the result, due to some of these financial pressures, is that though they were able to supplement with some private help, it was never enough. Because if you are living in a situation where you have a loved one at home and you are the primary caregiver, odds are their needs are quite high. And whatever is provided for publicly will never meet that need. So you, as a cash-strapped senior caregiver, as we see reflected in our data, are asked to somehow couple together enough money to supplement that privately, or frankly, put your life on the line, or put your family members' careers and jobs and their lives on the line to try to make up the difference. So I'm rambling slightly, but the point I want to leave you with here, Ms. Roberts, is that in these times where seniors are particularly cash-strapped for a variety of reasons, that we hear about every day, asking them to also pay for private care is virtually impossible because those costs are so high.
So my next question is, we know that 7.8 million Canadians provide unpaid care. So how can we support family members that leave their jobs to provide the care that they need for their spouses or children? As you know, James, I volunteer at a seniors home and I continue to do so. And I see the isolation and I see how people are struggling to take care of their, their family members that basically that they love and that they feel strapped. What can we do to ensure that the caregivers that are providing support to their family members, what can the government do to improve that?
For your question, I'll put two specific monetary issues on the table for consideration. The first is the one that I mentioned in my remarks, the Canada Caregiver Credit, converting it, from non-refundable to refundable, which would have the immediate morning after effect of putting some money in the pockets of caregivers through the tax code. Our recommendation based on previous party platforms is that that amount be $1,250 a year, not exactly an enormous amount, but an amount that we think is fiscally doable without bankrupting the country, and certainly an amount that has had cross-party support historically. So that's number one. That would put some monetary support directly in the pockets of caregivers immediately. Another issue that I'll put on the table, another solution I'll put on the table, particularly in the context of this study, is a proposed fix that we've put on the table pertaining to the Canada Pension Plan. The situation now is that if a caregiver, which is more likely to be a woman, takes time out of the labor market to provide care for somebody she loves, aging parent, for example, or an aging spouse, or a son or daughter with a disability, if she is out of the labor market, that means she is not contributing to the Canada Pension Plan. That means that when she retires and she receives that statement from the CPP outlining her earnings over the course of her working life, for those years that she was out of the labor market because she was providing care, her income is listed as zero. Consequently, the amount she receives from the Canada Pension Plan once she retires is dramatically lower than it would be had that contribution not been zero. There are provisions in there to allow for dropping of some of your lower years of income, but that does not take into account the fact that for many people, they're out of the labor market to provide care for somebody else. They're not doing it for fun. They're not doing it, to pursue a passion project. They're doing it to provide care for somebody else. Our proposal that we've put on the table through our national caregiving strategy is that when that senior applies for retirement, that her average annual earnings be applied to those years where her earnings were zero, and the net result is as if she had been working for those years.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts.
Madame la nouvelle.
Thank you to our new chair. On behalf of my colleagues, I hope that you have a good time as chair, and I'm sure that that will be the case. Thank you to our witnesses, Ms. Dubé, Ms. Dumas, Mr. Gennaro, Ms. Brown. I don't think I've ever taken as many notes since the beginning of this study. You have been clear and you've been generous in terms of the solutions you've offered, and that's what we're looking for in this committee. So I'd like to start with you, Ms. Dubé, because I heard from you, and Ms. Dumas, don't hesitate to speak if necessary. Ms. Dubé, we're talking about financial vulnerability. So you talked about fraud, which is more and more facilitated by digital technology. And senior women are very much affected by this. And what's unique about this fraud is that it's often mixed in with altruism and people's generosity. And so it's not a question of having your purse stolen at the grocery store, but people are using people's personal networks. So can you think about an initiative or a measure that could counter this type of fraud? And perhaps in the area of digital literacy, something could be suggested. So what would you have to share with us in terms of a possible avenue to find a solution to protect a senior woman from this type of fraud? Well, through you, Chair. Thank you for your question. I hope the technical problem has been resolved. My fingers are crossed. Great question. I think that there are a number of solutions, a number of avenues that we could explore.
Peut-être une campagne.
Yes, perhaps some kind of awareness raising campaign, because the heart of the issue is the fact that people of my age or people who are older don't necessarily understand the extent to which we can be vulnerable, and the fact that certain people may end up targeting us. So an awareness campaign could be organized by community organizations that exist throughout Canada, in our communities, and in minority situations. There's also the question of fighting against isolation, because the more a senior is isolated and perhaps bored, the more they'll be vulnerable to a phone call or an email, regardless of, or if they hear the voice of their child saying that they're in a problematic situation and they need money right away, or perhaps they receive a call from a bank that's not necessarily a bank, but it frightens them, because many seniors have certain concerns about the authorities. I'll give you a very personal example. For some time, I was receiving emails that seemed to be very official. It said that it was from the Attorney General from one of the Western provinces, and it said that I needed to appear in court because I had committed a crime. But instead of appearing in court in that province, I could send a certain amount of money, and this email was received many, many times. But I was able to figure out that it wasn't true. And so being able to organize some kind of awareness campaign for seniors, I think that that's a solution, a possible solution. Thank you, Ms. Dubé. You're right. These fraud techniques are becoming more and more sophisticated, and it's more and more difficult to distinguish the true from the false. Mr. Gennaro, your remarks were very detailed, and so you spoke about a possible change to a tax credit. So I'll give you a little bit more time. If you could provide us a little more detail on what you think would be effective. Thank you for the question. I'm going to answer in English.
Canada Caregiver Credit. So this is an existing non-refundable tax credit, but exists in the tax code, has for the last 7 or odd years. As a non-refundable credit, it does not really help you unless you owe tax at the end of the year, or if there's some other reason why you need to lower your tax burden that you're paying to the Canada Revenue Agency. For the majority, in particular, of lower income caregivers, this tax credit has no impact whatsoever, because they're lower income, they're not earning enough, and consequently they're not owing enough in taxes at the end of the year for this to make a material difference. So this tax credit is accessed by fewer than 10% of caregivers across the economy today. Of which there are 1 in 4 of us. 1 in 4 of us is a caregiver today. Our suggestion is to take this tax credit and convert it from a non-refundable credit to a refundable credit, which would have the effect of taking that same amount but turning it into money in your pocket through your tax return. So rather than lowering your bill, it provides more of a refund to you. Again, not at a particularly generous amount, but at an amount that we feel is fair, at least to begin, of $12.50 a year, which ends up being about $100 a month. Not a ton of money, but it's one more visit to the grocery store, one more bill you can pay.
Yes.
That's our suggestion.
C'est notre frustration, monsieur, c'est le temps.
And frustratingly, your time is up. Madame Larouche, over to you for 6 minutes.
La nouvelle présidente.
Thank you to our new chair. Welcome to your seat. And I hope that in spite of all the current challenges, that we'll be able to work together well. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. This question was has been raised in the committee, but I'm a spokesperson for this issue in our party, and for 2019, I'm also a spokesperson for or critic rather, for seniors' issues. And we understand that seniors face financial issues, but women are among the most affected financially speaking. And in the Journal de Montréal, there's an article that says it's not normal that in our society, half of seniors have difficulty with housing. Clearly, something is awry, and seniors have fixed income. And so these the guaranteed income supplement are also fixed. And for a number of years, we've seen a lot of inflation, especially since the pandemic. So groceries cost more, housing costs more. And for seniors, we see more seniors who are homeless, more seniors using food banks. So my question is, in the block, a first step, at the very least, we'd like to see is to address a problem, an inequality created by the government. There's been a 10% increase for people over the age of 65, and people between 65 and 74 haven't seen any increase. So we have a table, we're retabling a bill so that everyone receives the same pension. So how is this inequality unfair, and how would giving the same amount of money to everyone be a way to assist seniors? And I understand that everyone would probably want to answer this question, so perhaps I'll let you answer one after the other.
So I'm aware of that proposal, and our group is talking about the fact that solo seniors pay more tax than those who are married at common law. So increase in old age security will benefit people of all marital statuses, but an increase in old age security will still result in seniors who are widowed, separated, divorced, never married, still paying higher taxes on the same income as a senior couple. Why? Because, as I mentioned, some of the challenges that solo seniors have are pension income splitting. An increase in old age security will not address that structural tax issue. Similarly, I mentioned the fact that a couple can claim 6 credits on the same income, and a solo person can only claim 3 because there's 2 people in a couple and there's only 1 in a single, and that's the person age amount and the pension amount. And also the fact that if one member of a couple doesn't use up their age or pension, they can pass it to the remaining spouse. So those tax inequities will still exist even if old age security rises. It just means the solo senior will be paying higher taxes, still will be paying higher taxes on the same income as a couple. It just maybe that income has gone up with an increase in OAS, but it doesn't address underlying structural tax issues. And this is one of the reasons why we've recommended that we as solo seniors, we need to be identified as a separate and unique stakeholder group. We're not necessarily eligible for benefits that low-income seniors receive. We're not eligible, a lot of us, for guaranteed income supplement. That cutoff for income is around $22,000. And yet we've shown in our speaking notes that we could have a single person at $30,000 paying $1,200 more in taxes than a couple at $30,000. We're not eligible for the benefits that married folks receive. So where are we in the conversation? And if there were an initiative put forward, like MP LaRouche is suggesting, to say, will this particular initiative, will it fix tax inequity for solo seniors? Yes or no? Will it make the situation worse? Yes or no? And I think that sort of questioning now needs to be part of any changes like that. And not to say that you don't do it, but to say, what will it do to the unfair taxation of solo seniors? Will this initiative address it? And if it will, what do we do? And if not, then okay.
Madame Brown, j'aimerais laisser la chance à Monsieur Gennaro ou Madame.
I'd like to give Mr. Gennaro or Ms. Dubé raise your hand. I understand what you're saying. There are other inequalities, and this is just one among many. But for seniors who don't receive the same amount, it would be an important step. However, there are other inequalities we need to address. Ms. Dubé, thank you to the member of the committee. Thank you for your question. My first response would be that any initiative that can increase available income for the senior, and in this case specifically for women over the age of 65, that would be a good thing. And when I think about the situation in my province, in New Brunswick, if I think about a francophone woman who has a lower income, who has less work experience, less retirement income than her Anglophone sister in the same province. And this person is experiencing poverty at a more significant level compared with the Anglophone person. And so any additional income could be helpful in terms of making ends meet at the end of the month. And that's a situation that's arising. Many women, seniors, men too, have so much difficulty making ends meet. Thank you. Thank you. So we'll now move on to our next round of questions. Ms. Sakuti for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations. Today, I want to thank the witnesses for coming here on this very important topic. I'm hearing a lot from members of my community, especially seniors, about the affordability, their pensions, how they're going to survive, because what they plan for is not what's happening today. One of the letters I received from or a note was from a senior: "We are a senior couple, and I am planning to retire this year. Costs are climbing, and we are concerned and watchful. The high costs have a very real impact." Another one I received was, "My wife and I are both retired. We'd like to see some help on taxes for seniors. We are being burned on taxes on retirement funds we have saved up." So it seems to be there's a lot of struggling on seniors, and I'd like to ask this question of Elizabeth Brown. Many Canadians nearing retirement are facing a gap between what they've been able to save and the reality of today's cost of living, particularly those without workplace pensions. Can you speak to how current federal support, such as CPP, OAS, and savings incentives are or are not sufficient, and what risks this creates for financial vulnerability among those in retirement or who may retire in the next 5 to 10 years?
And I think the issue becomes specific, quite important when it comes to what status are you in when you're about to retire. If you're in a couple, I don't think a lot of folks anticipate what will happen when they lose that spouse. And so, for example, they may not be eligible for their spouse's CPP. There are some folks who think that when their spouse dies, that they're eligible for that spouse's OAS. They're not. There's no such thing as a survivor benefit for OAS. And so what we find is that we do hear from folks, so I don't think they necessarily plan for the fact that they could lose a spouse and what does that mean for their retirement earnings. There are financial planners out there that when seniors are retiring, they're not actually just talking about the seniors themselves. They're saying, are you planning for your elderly parents? Are you planning for your adult children and grandchildren? So because of increases in life expectancies, not only are the seniors themselves aging, but they could easily have parents who are still alive. And also could have children and grandchildren that they're helping. There was a study done by the RBC that said over 50% of seniors were dipping into personal savings to help their kids and grandkids. Yeah. Now, those folks could be married or common law, or they could be widowed, separated, divorced, never married. And if they're widowed, separated, divorced, never married, they have less disposable income because they're taxed more. So I think it's just being, and then of course we haven't even talked about healthcare, which is a huge independent variable.
I would like to ask you another question, if I might. To go on the topic that you were mentioning about someone losing their spouse, I was actually speaking to a senior woman in my community who just recently lost her husband, and she told me her GIS income threshold dropped in support by $7,000. So from what you see, does a woman's rent, heating, or property taxes fall by the same $7,000 when her husband passes away? Or is this policy out of step with reality and puts senior women in a more financially vulnerable state?
I mean, people's non-discretionary income, for example, is the same whether you are by yourself or not. 39% of seniors who are renters are living in unaffordable housing defined as spending more than 30% of their monthly income on rent. And so, yet those folks could be married or common law, but they also could be widowed, separated, divorced, never married. Folks who are single are going to be taxed more, but they face exactly the same household expenditures. And we hear from folks all the time who have lost a spouse. They're going through the worst position in their lives. They're doing their first set of tax returns after losing a spouse. They find their taxes significantly more, but all of them say, my base expenses haven't changed.
Thank you for that. We've seen increases to old age security targeted only to those over 75. So I was wondering, from your perspective, do seniors aged 65 to 74 face materially different cost pressures, or has this created a gap in the support? Like, are you hearing from seniors under 75 who feel they've been left behind despite facing the same inflation in housing costs?
I think one of the first challenges is the definition. There is really no adequate definition for inflation for seniors. The CPI doesn't necessarily include things that the seniors are more likely to spend money on, and even the Auditor General herself has said there's really no valid measure for inflation for seniors. So I think that's the first part of the challenge. But, you know, I think, again, non-discretionary expenses don't really seem to change with age. So, again, what we find is that I don't think if you're below 75 or above 75 that those really change. And again, we don't really know what people's health expenses are going to be, and that's another huge independent variable as well. So we do obviously will require more health care as we age. So I think there's so much variability in what people's expenses are, but we have not certainly heard from folks, whether they're 65 to 74 or 75 and up, saying that there's really any difference when it comes to how they're taxed if they're by themselves.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you. So we will go to the government side. Ms. Nathan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Thanking the witnesses for being here today, and we would like to hear from you about Mr. Gennaro, first you. So researchers show that caregiving responsibilities often follow women across generations. From caring for children to caring for aging parents, how does this sandwich generation affect compound pension gaps and retirement insecurity for women who never have sustained period of full workplace participation, and what structural reforms could interrupt this cycle?
Yes, thank you, MP Nathan, for your question. And you've hit the nail on the head around a really big part of this issue. Men and women are just as likely as each other to be caregivers, so 50-50 split more or less. But women are more likely to be caregivers more often and for longer and for more people over the course of their lives. Consequently, the impact on their incomes and on their savings and their earnings tends to be higher because they're out of the labor market for longer, they're working less, they're spending more, they've got more expenses. Childcare is part of it, but it's also, as you rightfully say, around the sandwich generation question, around the concurrent caring factors of caring for children, as well as supporting aging parents. I'll throw one more at you as well, which is the possibility of supporting, say, a sibling or a cousin with a developmental disability or a mental health challenge or an addiction challenge, and so on and so forth. The impact on all of that together, just focusing on their retirement security for a moment vis-a-vis CPP, is that if, like about half of caregivers in that situation, they take time out of the labor market to provide care, their earnings come down to zero or very close to zero, which means that in the day that happens, there's significantly less money to pay the rent, pay the mortgage, put food on the table for yourself, let alone support somebody you love who might be near the end of life or having their own challenges on top of that. Fast forward to when they retire. This is where you get to that point I made earlier in response to, I believe, Madame Menard's question around the CPP. Around if you've worked less over the course of your life and you retire, your CPP earnings are dramatically lower when you get there. Unfortunately, the situation as it's set up right now effectively punishes caregivers for life when they retire. And this predominantly targets female caregivers who are more likely, as we heard from other evidence, more likely to have less savings, be more reliant on spousal supports, spousal savings and spousal income over the course of their lives, and also less likely to have workplace benefits because they're less likely to have been in the workforce as long as somebody else who wasn't a caregiver. So in this regard, it's that factor, being a caregiver versus not a caregiver, that makes a big difference.
Thank you. And can you suggest any structural reforms that could interrupt this?
Absolutely. There are things that can be done while the woman is still working age. There are a battery of things that could be done to better support a woman to balance care and work. For example, access to more care services, access to respite, lower wait lists for treatments and the like, and just making sure that the kinds of services that a caregiver needs in the moment is available when they need it. That's to do with sort of the day-to-day life of caregiving. On the financial side, on the CPP fix specifically, we'll focus on a woman in particular, on a female who's reaching the retirement age, if it were possible that as she is preparing for retirement and going through the paperwork around the CPP, if it were possible to apply her average earnings to those years where she was out of the labor market due to her caregiving responsibilities, that would fix this problem and also, in our opinion, fix an inequity in the system that can be corrected through good public policy.
Very good. Thank you so much for that. And one more question on the One Economy Act aims to improve labor mobility across provinces. Now, for caregivers who relocate to support a family member, what portability gaps exist in caregiver benefits and workplace protection, and how should federal policy address these as labor mobility increases?
That's an excellent question. There are many of these barriers. One thing, for example, that caregivers tell us that they would desperately need and have benefited from over the last few years is more flexible work arrangements, like working from home, for example.
Merci, Monsieur Gennaro. Nous allons...
Thank you, Mr. Gennaro. We'll now pass to Ms. LaRouche for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Once again, thank you, Ms. Dubé, Ms. Dumas, Ms. Brown, for being here with us. So I'm going to give Mr. Gennaro the opportunity to answer the previous question, because I think that what I'm hearing is that there are many inequalities, and there are also problems in having enough income once you're retired. So, Mr. Gennaro, what could the effect of giving people this 10% increase for people aged 65 to 74? Thank you, Ms. LaRouche, for your work on the issue. I'm going to answer you in English.
Speaking at committee regarding your bill, and we supported it then. We continue to support the idea today. I'll just say very quickly, in the interest of time, that when I was in school learning about these issues in my social policy class, it was kind of widely accepted that seniors' poverty had been solved, that was an issue that we could tick the box and be quite proud of. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case today. So initiatives like yours would certainly be welcome to help solve these problems.
So aside this 10% increase for everyone retired over the age of 65, Mr. Gennaro, there are also, as you said, in terms of the work of caregivers, you talked about the sandwich generation, and Ms. Nathan talked about this. It's invisible work. In Quebec, there are groups of women who are asking for a day of recognition for invisible work, the first Tuesday in April, which could be a day where we could think about what kind of measures could be put into place to better recognize this invisible work. And the women who are the majority of caregivers, and many who reduce their work hours or quit their jobs. So do you support the request that we've made to allow EI payments to be available to caregivers for up to 50 weeks? And how could this help resolve the financial situation of women?
Strategy as well, Madame LaRouche, and we see this in our data as well coming from caregivers, so fully support that idea as well.
Okay. And in terms of tax credits, what's the impact of having only non-refundable tax credits?
On people's tax returns is why we spend a lot of time talking about that issue in particular, and welcome the committee's support on that.
Merci, cher monsieur. Madame Goodrich.
Thank you, Ms. Goodrich. 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and congratulations. So I'm going to start with either Ms. Dumas or Ms. Dubé. Thank you very much for the work that you do. I'm a francophone from Alberta, and so the services that you provide in Alberta are very much appreciated. And There are seniors in my area that use the services you provide often.
Impact.
Could you describe what the impact of fraud is on Francophone seniors, and how is it different from fraud that we see in the Anglophone world?
Vous êtes sourdine.
Vous êtes sur...
You are on mute. You're on mute.
M'entendez maintenant?
Can you hear me now?
Mais je pense que l'impact est vrai. Définitivement.
The impact is definitely similar, whether it's among Anglophones or Francophones. But in French Canada, given the minority aspect, often programs and things that could allow our Francophone seniors to be better equipped are less available than they are elsewhere in Canada. So, at the Fédération des Aînés, the issue is making sure that we have the same tools, the same opportunities to provide everyone with. And in Ms. Dubé's presentation, we heard that women are often the target of these problems. So as much as possible, we're trying to find ways to minimize the impact of these issues on women. And as our colleague mentioned, there are tax differences when you are a single woman versus a woman in a couple. So this is quite concerning. And it's very sad that in 2026 that we don't have a fairer approach, and that's my opinion. Thank you very much.
Janiro, thank you again for being here and for the work you do on caregiving. I think it's so incredibly important, and we know that oftentimes that does fall to women, and so this has a huge impact when the caregiver somehow falls into some kind of a fraud or abuse. Then their ability to be able to provide that absolutely required caregiving becomes that much harder. How are the rising costs with the ever-increasing inflation having an impact on the people that you're dealing with in the caregiving space?
Yeah, Ms. Goodrich, thank you for your question, and thank you for your championship of caregiving issues more generally across the board. That is an excellent question. I'll paint for the committee a picture that a pay packet that a caregiver receives, be it through retirement or through employment earnings, inevitably actually ends up serving, in effect, two households. Both their household themselves, their kids, their husband, and so on, but also if they're a caregiver, they're supporting somebody else. And about a third of caregivers provide financial support to somebody else as well. So, in effect, this pay packet, when it comes in, is supporting two groups of people at minimum if that person is a caregiver. The costs that come along with being a caregiver, in addition to the things that we might all understand quite well, food, rent, electricity, internet, that sort of thing, depending on what sort of caregiving you're engaged in, there can be significant added costs on top of that. Think medical supplies, incontinence supplies, nutritional aids, equipment, that sort of thing.
I appreciate that you actually bring that up because I help provide some of the care for my grandmother. And those are some of the conversations, like some of the additional costs of those things. You don't really think about it, at least I didn't the first few times I would go to the store and just pick up an extra $20 or $30 worth of things. But all of a sudden that's every week or every couple weeks, and it becomes a lot of extra money. And so as grocery prices go up, as gasoline prices go up, that means that they have that much less disposable income. So are seniors seeing the results of that?
Merci, Madame Goodrich.
Sorry.
Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Goodrich. No, you don't have to say sorry. Mr. Chen. Thank you, Chair, and congratulations for your new role.
Saying that it's very enlightening to hear the many recommendations that are being made from all the witnesses today. And I trust that these will certainly guide our committee's work in the coming days. I do have a question for Mr. Anero, who spoke about some of the suggestions, for example, ensuring that those older women who had zero income in certain years due to unpaid work, such as caregiving, receive the benefits they deserve in retirement. I know in my riding of Scarborough North, we have an immensely diverse population, 70% of which were born outside of Canada. And there is a phenomenon among older adults who immigrate to Canada that there's an expectation of free childcare. So while we are a welcoming country and we value immigration, we also support family reunification, and that includes parents and grandparents. When older adults come to this country and are grappling with the challenges of language barrier, settlement, and integration, they can face hardship in this undue stress of free childcare expectations. How do we account for that? Are there any suggestions that you may have in how we support those populations that are even marginalized further and face immense vulnerability in later parts of their life due to these circumstances?
I'll say, first of all, Mr. MP Chen, thank you for your question on this. I'll say I'm a little bit biased. I was basically raised by my grandparents who came from Portugal, so I'm a little biased in this regard. I'll add one thing to your question, which is to say both childcare as well as elder care. That there's an expectation that if you are coming from abroad through family reunification, there can be an expectation that you're here to provide care of all sorts, child care as well as elder care for somebody else. I think it's critically important to be upfront with that at the beginning, if that's part of the conversation for why reunification is being pursued. The other thing is those same services and supports that can help caregivers who are in Canada today can be extended to caregivers in that situation as well. So access to respite, access to social services, access to more equitable tax treatment, access to tax credits, all that sort of thing. So extending that safety net to anybody who's in this care situation, I think would be very important. Another one I'll throw at you is this concept of caregiver training. I learned the hard way, just to bring my grandmother into this conversation again, that moving around my now late grandfather when he was in distress is not a matter of brute force, which I have in abundance. It's a matter of technical skill. And training and knowing how to do it safely. I did that for my grandpa. Years later, I'm still feeling the effects of that regularly. So providing some formalized caregiver training to people in that situation so that they know the basics of how to interact with systems, but also how to provide that hands-on kind of more medical care like moves, transfers, medical administration, changing of incontinence supplies, all of that sort of thing. I think all of that together would make a big difference in the areas you're talking about, Mr. Chen.
Thank you very much. Turning to you, Ms. Brown, you talked about some of the changes that would be helpful to older adults and seniors with respect to financial inequities in the tax system. Having just helped my parents file their tax returns, the T1s are submitted. Everything's good, but yes, it was. I got it in just in time. However, I know that many seniors are accessing benefits, but some are not, and some are not even filing taxes, which make them ineligible to even receive certain benefits. Have you seen that, and what do you think are some of the solutions? How can government work to ensure that those that are vulnerable are seniors, especially women?
Ceci conclut, Monsieur Chen.
Okay. I'm sorry, that is it for you, Mr. Chen. Thank you to all our witnesses for their availability today. That is the end of our first panel, and we'll suspend our meeting for a few minutes to allow our second panel to arrive. Please take your seats. Just a few comments for the benefit of witnesses. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. And please mute yourself when you are not speaking at the bottom of your screen. You can select the appropriate channel, Floor, English, or French. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. For those on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. And a reminder for those of you in the room.
Ça va, madame? C'est parfait? Parfait. Je vous rappelle que toutes les interventions.
I'd like to remind you that all comments from members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. And for your microphones, for those of you in the room, you don't have to turn it on or off. Someone will do it for you. I'd like to welcome our witnesses from Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, Marta C. Hajek. Hope I pronounced your name correctly. Chief Executive Officer, National Pensioners Federation, Patricia McAuliffe, President, and New Society Institute, Dr. Doris Rajan, Managing Director.
Mrs. Hajek, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Distinguished Chair, committee members, and fellow panelists, bonjour. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today to speak about an issue that is too often hidden in plain sight, the abuse and financial vulnerability of older women. The committee has already heard testimony from several of my respected colleagues and longstanding system partners working in the space of elder abuse prevention, so I will not repeat the many important contributions they have already made. As CEO, I am speaking on behalf of Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, a provincially funded charitable organization that has spent over 3 decades addressing elder abuse, its root causes, and growing complexities. We have prioritized our work through a preventative lens, coordinating community response, raising public awareness through education, excuse me, and training cross-sectoral service professionals to recognize and effectively respond to those experiencing abuse. Each day we hear directly from older adults, especially women, about the realities that they are experiencing, and what we hear is deeply concerning. The consequences of those realities are what I would like to impart to you today. Older women in Canada are living longer, and that should be a success story. The reality is that longevity is accompanied by increased exposure to harm, particularly financial abuse, coercive control, and neglect. In fact, financial abuse is one of the most common forms of abuse, disproportionately affecting older women. Why? Because in part, financial vulnerability in later life does not happen by accident. It is built over a lifetime. Many have lived through decades of unequal pay, interrupted careers due to caregiving responsibilities, limited access to pensions, and restricted control over assets. They are not individual failures. They are structural realities. And they follow women into older age, creating conditions where dependency can take hold. Where there is dependency, there is risk. Financial abuse, like most abuse, often happens within relationships where there is an expectation of trust, an adult child quietly taking over a bank account, a caregiver pressuring an older person to sign documents that they do not fully understand, or the misuse of a power of attorney. Loss of financial security can mean loss of housing, inability to afford necessary health care or medication. It can mean being forced to remain in unsafe or abusive environments because the options are homelessness and loss of care. Losing autonomy that defines dignity in later life is demoralizing. Despite its prevalence, this abuse remains underreported as most women face significant barriers to doing so. The fear of retaliation, institutionalization, or breakdown of families. They feel shame or are made to believe that what is happening is simply part of aging. It is not. Coupled with language barriers, cognitive decline can make seeking help even more difficult. Today, over 770,000 Canadians age 65 are living with dementia, and almost 62% are women. Living with dementia should not mean losing the right to protections afforded others. Acknowledging this should increase our collective responsibility to act. Of note are the emerging risks where financial systems are becoming digital, yet older women are navigating these online environments that were not designed with them in mind. While digital tools can support independence, they also create new pathways for fraud and exploitation. It has been reported that in 2024, Canadians lost over $643 million to fraud, with older adults again being disproportionately targeted. So what needs to change? We must name financial abuse of older women for what it is, a form of gender-based violence and coercive control. We must strengthen systemic first points of contact so that everyone who engages with older adults can recognize the warning signs and respond safely to support the older women in need. We must reduce barriers to reporting so that they are not navigating complex mechanisms or, at worst, having to repeat their trauma over and over again just to get help. Finally, we must continue to invest in prevention, advancing financial literacy, promoting public awareness through targeted education, and by addressing ageism, gender equality, and economic insecurity. Because at its core, this is not only about financial harm, it is about how we value older women. Older women are not passive, they are caregivers, community leaders, and builders. They have shaped our society and deserve to age with dignity. Canada has historically demonstrated leadership on the global stage with respect to human rights.
Thank you very much. I'll now pass the floor to Ms. McAuliffe.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I thank you for the invite and opportunity to appear before you today. I speak on behalf of the National Pensioners Federation, a national, nonprofit, grassroots seniors advocacy organization representing nearly 1 million members through over 250 retiree groups, chapters, and associations across Canada. Our long-established affiliated organizations have secured a place in history, helping advance critical retirement benefits like pension plan protections, the Canada Pension Plan, old age security, and the Guaranteed Income Supplement. They have stood up against poverty stigma, challenged systemic barriers, and worked tirelessly to protect the dignity, income, and well-being of the most vulnerable older Canadians, particularly women. I respectfully thank all the previous witnesses who have presented to this committee, detailing their research and providing factual information about ageism, sexism, and racism and systemic barriers deeply ingrained in our social construct that profoundly affect the lives of older people today, but most particularly the lives of marginalized older women. Therefore, reflecting on our conversations here today, I am here to press for the prompt adoption of 4 government interventions that would make a meaningful and visible difference in the lives of older women across Canada. As the NPF, we respectfully ask immediate appointment of a federal minister for seniors. Secondly, establish and fund independent seniors advocates in every province. Third, implement and fund national standards for long-term care. And finally, ensure unequivocal federal support for a UN Convention on the Rights of Older Adults. A ministry for seniors, as a dedicated minister for seniors, is not a luxury. It is a necessity for cross-sectoral approach to solutions. A minister with a clear mandate, adequate resources, and authority can coordinate policies across departments, prioritize older adults' issues in cabinet, and ensure accountability to Canadians. Equally important, continuity within government preserves institutional knowledge and supports evidence-based policy that keeps pace with an aging population. A national framework for seniors advocates. While few provinces have seniors advocates, Canada lacks a consistent, independent framework nationwide. These advocates play a critical role, monitor policy delivery, handle complaints, hold governments and industries accountable, guide individuals through complex systems, and provide actionable recommendations to government. In 2024, the Auditor General of Canada called for a comprehensive audit to ensure federal programs meet seniors' needs. This reinforces the need for both an independent seniors advocate and a dedicated minister working together to keep policy responsive and effective. Long-term care, well, COVID revealed what many Canadians already feared: neglect, abuse, preventable deaths, and care homes. In British Columbia, advocates such as Isabel McKenzie and Dan Levitt have identified serious gaps affecting particularly affecting low-income women in care. Most seniors want to remain independent, yet inadequate home care and financial insecurity are forcing vulnerable women from their homes, sometimes into hospitals, shelters, or homelessness. Without safe, affordable options, many have no choice. A UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons, ageism remains deeply embedded in our systems. That is why the NPF has supported Canada's International Longevity Centre to advance a UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. In 2024, we participated in proceedings in New York and witnessed a strong global momentum. Canada's position has evolved, but it remains inconsistent. Leadership is needed to embed a rights-based framework in policy and ensure no older Canadian is left behind, especially women living in poverty.
Merci beaucoup, Madame. Nous avons rencontré des...
Thank you very much. We have had a few problems with your video, so someone from our IT team will call you, so please accept the call so we can address these issues. Dr. Rajan.
For inviting me and the New Society Institute here. When examining the issue of abuse against senior women with a focus on financial vulnerability, it's initially important to establish what we mean by women, because the broad label can obscure and fail to recognize very different experiences and levels of vulnerability, specifically how that vulnerability is a consequence of historically design of institutions and practices that have set the stage for different experiences of inequality between men and women. As we know, older women in Canada are more likely to spend years providing unpaid care for their aging spouse, which impacts their income and health, living longer with chronic conditions, and navigating care systems alone. Senior women experience heightened financial insecurity because they are more likely to have lower lifetime earnings due to caregiving and lower paid work, resulting in smaller or no pensions and saving. Many face income loss after widowhood, divorce, and are more likely to live alone, as we heard, increasing the risk of poverty and housing insecurity. Older women experience many other barriers in their everyday life related to transportation, mobility, and access to community activities, which results in a pronounced social isolation and loneliness. Further, when this broad category of senior women is layered with other historically shaped systems of exclusion, such as those based on race that justified the colonization of Indigenous peoples, the enslavement of diverse African peoples, the early exploitation of racialized migrant labor, and the mass institutionalization of deaf and disabled people, that vulnerability is intensified. These layers of marginalizations result in significantly worse socioeconomic outcomes for specific groups of women. For example, racialized and immigrant senior women experience some of the highest rates of low income, approximately 19% and 18% respectively. Disabled seniors face poverty rates as high as 20%, 4 times higher than non-disabled people, with senior disabled women also experience even lower lifetime earnings and a reduced access to pensions, resulting in a much greater reliance on fixed low-income supports. Indigenous seniors experience significantly higher rates of poverty, food insecurity, chronic illness, and social isolation than non-Indigenous seniors, which is compounded again for Indigenous women who also carry a disproportionate amount of caregiving responsibility and across their lifespan. Urban Indigenous seniors face elevated social isolation, with approximately 8% reporting they have no one to rely on. We also see the relationship between the heightened rates of gender-based violence and marginalized senior women and financial vulnerability. For example, the lifelong impact of violence against Indigenous women further contributes to poorer health, persistent poverty, and poor housing outcomes in older age. Further, the challenges faced by senior disabled women and Indigenous women, most often than not, shouldn't be understood as separate, given the higher prevalence of disability amongst Indigenous peoples. These multiple barriers across marginalized groups can feel overwhelming for those of us that are involved in social change efforts. However, while it's evident that these different groups of senior women experience abuse and financial vulnerability in distinct ways, we can also note that there's clear patterns of commonalities across their experience, such as heightened financial insecurity, barriers to accessing support, social isolation, and high rates of violence. So investments should be made at the local level where diverse senior women can design community and place-based specific actions. At the policy level, our institute has been developing a web application, which has a long name, acronym is PRIA, which is grounded in the lived experience that enables policy analysts to systematically analyze the multitude of laws and policies that senior women in Canada interact with. This analysis goes beyond broad statements of policy reform, such as there's a need for policy reform to improve the adequacy of income supports. Rather, it points to precise provisions in laws and policies where diverse senior women are not adequately supported, offering a comprehensive review across multiple statutes and policies to generate targeted recommendations. Understanding.
Merci.
That's it.
Ce sera tout, Madame.
Thank you. That is all the time we have for your presentation. You'll be able to answer our members' questions, and we'll start with our first round of questions. Ms. Cody, you have the floor.
My question to Ms. Is it Hajek? We've been hearing in committees from experts now on elder abuse and that it's on the rise, and where there's emphasis to pass legislation to protect victims. One of the bills going forward is Bill C-16, Protecting the Victims Act. And we've heard from seniors groups that they don't see protection for seniors in this bill to identify elder abuse, and their coercive control is too narrow. In your view, should it include seniors and other vulnerable adults who may be coerced through dependency, housing, or financial control rather than physical violence alone?
Thank you for the question. So I had the privilege of also testifying in front of the Justice Committee around C-16. Absolutely, the wider interpretation that we can have of who is covered under the bill would certainly be helpful. There is a suggestion of waiting 2 years and then looking to include potentially other caregivers or other relevant people within that older adult's life. Somebody who's experiencing abuse just wants it to stop, and I'm not sure that they have it within them to some of these cases to wait another 2 years while the person who is particularly perpetrating the abuse is included in the definition.
Thank you. Also during committee, we're hearing about the elder abuse, but we've also heard that human trafficking of seniors is on the rise. Can you tell us what you've heard in your role, and do you have anything to explain why this is the case?
Again, I can speak to sort of staying in my lane and knowing in terms of what we are dealing with on a daily basis. But absolutely, human trafficking is not limited just to younger women. It is also to older women, whether for engaging them in labor, unpaid, or even for sexual activities as well. We used to hear maybe 250 situations over the course of a year. Now, specifically around elder abuse, we are hearing about 1,900 cases that we have interaction with the individuals over the course of 3 months. So it is definitely escalating. The perpetrators are becoming more clever in terms of how they perpetrate these crimes. We need to do everything possible to help protect older populations from human trafficking specifically and abuse.
Do you think this is linked to affordability and financial hardships that seniors are facing?
In part, yes. It would be impacted because somebody that is in dire straits financially and can't put food on the table or cannot get proper medical care would certainly look to resort to those kinds of, or succumbing to that kind of activity.
We're hearing again a lot about burnout for caregivers, and it's easy to see why. The cost of living is so much more than it used to be, and salaries for our caregivers haven't kept up. You know, and many are struggling to pay for a lot of these supports out of their own pocket. Is there a link between rates of burnout for caregivers and care providers and the rates of elder abuse?
I would have to get back to you in terms of statistical support for that, but most definitely there are linkages, yes.
Continue on with my questions to Ms. McAuliffe. Under current CPP rules, a survivor can never receive, can never receive more than the maximum individual benefit. That means a household receiving close to $2,800 a month in CPP can see that cut significantly after losing their spouse. Given women's lifetime CPP contributions are much lower due to caregiving years or time out of the workplace, do you believe this structure reflects the reality of today?
Tell her she's on mute.
Oh, she's on mute.
Vous êtes en sourdine, madame.
Sorry, having technical difficulties, so a little frayed over here. Yes, of course, CPP is definitely linked to the career path of women. This starts at a young age. We know that through family situations. But today, the reality is that we're hearing from persons collecting government pensions that it's not keeping pace with inflation. It's not keeping pace with housing in particular, and indeed with medical costs as persons are aging. So we consistently hear from our members, from seniors across Canada, that CPP needs to be increased along with other government benefit plans. It's just simply not keeping pace with affordability, if that was your question. I'm getting cut out.
Like you were talking about the old age security between 65 and 75, and where the old age security increases targeted those over 75. So I want to hear from you. I've asked this question before to another witness. Do seniors aged 65 to 74 face materially different cost pressures, or have they created this gap of support? Like, are you hearing from seniors under 75 who feel they've been left behind despite facing the same inflation housing costs?
Definitely, we've been asking for harmonization of these
Thank you very much. I have to interrupt you to pass the floor to Ms. Khalid.
Again, congratulations on your new role. We're very excited to have you chairing this very, very important committee. I want to pick up on the testimony of Ms. Rajan, because that is something that I hear from my constituents a lot, and that is the role of new immigrants, and I say new as in like 20, 30 years old, and how that intersection plays in within our support for seniors. So the challenge is that immigrant workers, no matter where they're coming from in the world, they tend to have, the spouses tend to stay home, take care of the family, while the gentleman goes out and works. So therefore, he's the only one that's making contributions to a pension plan if they have one. And then when it comes time for retirement, statistically, we know that men generally tend to die earlier because women have a lot more laundry to do, apparently. But so it leaves them with not only not enough income to sustain themselves, but also without the ability to take care of themselves, whether it's with respect to healthcare, whether it's with respect to housing, etc. So, if I may ask, I'll start with Ms. McAuliffe. I hope that you had the opportunity to hear Ms. Rajan's speaking remarks earlier today. What do you think are some of the recommendations that we could make as a committee to protect those immigrants that are coming in, putting in that effort, working within our country, but then not being able to sustain themselves long enough to have a dignified, respectful living after retirement?
Well, thank you for that important question. I think the cultural necessity of aging for aging Canadians is an important topic that I believe needs to be investigated further, and those representatives at the table. It's the people who reflect the policies that need to be in the discussions, particularly. Our organization, as diverse as we are, we recognize that there needs to be a whole relook at the government benefit plans. We've recognized that in 2024, the Auditor General has recommended that, so we stand in full support of that. Unfortunately, because of the technical difficulties, I was not able to fully hear the previous speakers, and I'm sorry for that, but I appreciate the question.
Thank you very much. So just turning to Ms. Rajan, I really appreciate you outlining the challenges as you have outlined them. And one additional one that I will also outline is I have this amazing seniors facility, long-term care center in my writing that is tailored for Ukrainian community. And the nurses there speak Ukrainian, they serve Ukrainian food. And I asked one of the nurses, well, why do you think this is necessary? And she said, well, as you get older, you tend to revert back to what your younger years were. How important do you think it is for government to invest in culturally sensitive retirement homes, long-term care centers, obviously not to just put in the money completely, but to build maybe public-private partnerships with that?
Thank you for the question. It's so interesting because I think that is one strategy because as you mentioned and I briefly discussed, the whole situation for immigrant families, whether newcomers are people that have been here for 30 years, the whole structure is different, in terms of the family. There's expectations that, that as MP Chan said that, that they look after, you've got seniors looking after, very old seniors looking after their grandchildren, et cetera. So what I'm saying is there's such a commitment to the family, which also heightens their vulnerability to abuse, and particularly financial abuse, because in many of these households, they're not having access to their OAC, et cetera, and they're not even having access to their own money. So there'd be barriers for, I think, a lot of particularly collectivist societies to go into a home. I'm thinking of the South Asian communities, Chinese communities, et cetera, because the understanding would be that they would remain at home and paying an integral part of running that home into their old age. So that's the first piece of that. But I do think that's something that a number of communities have explored. I believe there's something similar in Toronto for the Chinese community. I know, for example, the Tamil community, as you've probably heard, is trying to set up something like that too. I think it's an important investment, but I think there's also a need to invest in immigrant families as a whole, because it's the extreme poverty and the overcrowding, et cetera, that creates very vulnerable positions, particularly
Merci
for
beaucoup, Madame. Je dois vous interrompre. Merci.
Thank you very much. I have to interrupt you. Well, now, and it's always frustrating that our time is limited. Ms. LaRouche for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you to all of our witnesses, Ms. McCliff, Ms. Rajan, and Ms. Hajek, for being here with us today for this very important study. And we're hearing more and more about this financial situation among seniors. It's very worrying. So, Ms. McAuliffe, you weren't really able to answer when Ms. Cody asked her question, and we were talking about the Block's bill to increase old age security for people between 64 and 75 years of age, and so as to provide the same amount to everyone starting at the age of 65, given that during this study we've seen the difficulties women have to accumulate the same amount of money as men for their retirement. So how does this inequality between people between the age of 64 and 75 and 75 and older specifically affect women, and what's the importance of providing the same amount to everyone over the age of 65, especially women?
Thank you for that important question. And to reflect back on the question previously asked, respectfully, I like to say that we have been calling with many seniors organizations across Canada for the harmonization of the of pension credits, or harmonization, sorry, of payments to OAS. The crux of the matter is poverty begins at a much earlier part in life for women, and it impacts them greatly after the age of retirement, and especially at the loss of a spouse. So it is important to note that there seems to be no concrete reason or rationale as to why. We've asked this question many times. Why did that 10% increase happen at 74? It doesn't add up. People who retired at 64, 65 and above are experiencing health issues related to stress, especially post-COVID. There are medical conditions that apply specifically to women. We look at the medical industry and the supportive measures that need to be put in place for resources and access to medical services are increasingly important for women. Unresearched, undocumented support and costs. So absolutely, we're calling for the increase of that 10% for those 65 and older. We need to have a consistent, not a two-tiered plan, and that's been the common denominator from all of the senior groups across Canada that we're united with.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Ms. McAuliffe. And as a follow-up question, and another area where the Bloc is doing a lot of work, so if we were to establish the same amount for everyone, afterward, we'll need to take a look at the issue of indexing and for the guaranteed income supplement and for old age security. And we understand that this is a fixed source of income that doesn't increase at the same rate as wages, and in order to address the issue of inflation, especially in terms of housing and groceries. So is the consumer price index still the best way to index the old age security and the guaranteed income supplement? Should another calculation be used?
Yeah, I think we've drawn to that conclusion through the discussions through the last 3 meetings. I think it's been a consistent message that the CPI does not reflect older age, costs of living, costs of care, and costs to access the services they need. Increasingly, we're seeing user fees for medical services, for eyeglasses, eye surgeries, hip surgeries. User fees are impeding access for seniors to get the care that they need. Transportation costs are increasing. So the CPI does not reflect the needs for seniors. And again, on the call for the Auditor General to review benefits, I think is an essential piece of our discussion today, and hopefully that you'll move forward with that recommendation that a complete review of government benefits for older persons be completed as recommended.
Thank you very much. So very quickly, Ms. Hajek.
En ce moment, quelqu'un qui me contacte parce que
And someone contacted me because the National Bank closed its bank in Valcourt, a municipality in my area, and we know that banks are a federal responsibility and seniors can have a lot of difficulty. Not everyone has the same level of financial literacy in terms of fraud. It's hard to get access to someone at a bank, and these people have difficulty using online services. So, Ms. Hajek, is it important, and it would be good to have an obligation to strengthen? Are you in contact with banks on this subject? Are institutions who are detecting these suspicious amounts, is this something that's important? You've got 30 seconds to answer my question.
Thank you for the question. And yes, in a short answer, we are in touch with the 5 major banks across the country, as well as credit unions. We are looking to make sure that banks are consistent in terms of their information offering, and in situations where there is abuse, for example, or financial exploitation, that there are measures that are quick and appropriate for the senior to be able to have.
Thank you, Ms. Hajek. Ms. Goodrich, over to you.
And thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Ms. Hajek, I really appreciated how you talked about the need for reducing barriers to reporting, as well as the importance about financial literacy. And I think overall, it doesn't matter whether it's children or seniors, there is so much lacking with financial literacy, and specifically a space where a lot of women were told that wasn't theirs to take care of. And so by the time that becomes their responsibility, the spouse dies, maybe because of some kind of abuse, and they're doing it on their own, they are so much further behind, leading them into a space where they're that much more apt for abuse. Is this something that you have any solutions for?
In terms of financial literacy, I think everybody has a responsibility to participate. So when you engage with an older adult in the course of your daily practice as a service professional, or whether it's someone that you just live next door to, having that conversation with people to make sure that they are receiving the kind of care and supports that they need. You don't know what you don't know. So in terms of our societal obligation, we have to look after each other. In cases of service providers like banks, for example, they're increasingly starting to put out information about, how to watch out for frauds and scams. But financial abuse, for the most part, happens within a relationship of trust where it's a family member, and that older adult is isolated. So how do you get through that? I mean, COVID was a perfect example. When we were in lockdown, we knew very little of what was happening behind closed doors. But it was incumbent on each of us to be part of society, to be caring about the people that live next door to us, and make sure that they are not in dire straits, or at least that they have the kind of support that they would require. Conversations around disclosure don't happen at the drop of a hat. It is something where you have to build that relationship. You have to let the senior know that you are watching them, that you're looking out for them, and you're trying to be there as a support should something bad happen.
For that. And one thing, it's come up quite a bit. I sit on the Human Resources Committee, and we've had lots of conversation about the CURAM and the switch of the federal government's OAS to a new system delivery, and the fact that there's thousands and thousands of people getting stuck in a backlog. How would delays in people getting government services make them more at risk for financial abuse?
If people are aware that there is a mechanism now where they can circumvent the rules or they can get around things like this, they will reach out to vulnerable seniors, for example, and offer all kinds of things like, oh, okay, I'm going to come and fix your roof, and it's only going to cost you this amount of money. But if you give me $1,000 today, I guarantee that will be done, and that'll be one less thing for you to have to worry about. So people that are scammers, people that are opportunists in terms of financial exploitation, they prey on those vulnerabilities when somebody is feeling unsupported or is isolated or at risk. And those vulnerabilities now create social situations where the person feels that they're actually being helped, where they're in fact being set up for a scam or a crime.
Rajan, the same question to you. How does delays in government services being provided and government supports impact and make people more vulnerable?
I think, first of all, because I'm focusing so much on marginalized senior women. So what we found in a lot of our research, particularly in elder abuse with those populations like disabled seniors and immigrant, racialized, and Indigenous seniors, often they don't even know that there's government benefits. We just did a big study with the disability tax credit across the country in local communities in all 5 regions of Canada. And those particular groups populations weren't even aware of the different benefits that are there. So that's the first.
Is aware of a program, and they have applied, and they're now waiting 9+ months beyond what they were told they were going to wait. Like, that has to have an impact on more than just their mental health, but their ability to survive.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think, again, the populations I'm focusing on are trying to survive every day, you know, so any amount of money they get per month is an advantage. So it's crucial that they have access.
Merci, Madame. Ça conclut votre réponse.
Thank you. Ms. Ménard, thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being available and for having been so generous and enlightening in your comments. Dr. Rajan, we're going to continue what you started with, Ms. Goodridge. When it comes to benefits, well, what's the most unfortunate in terms of government measures is when we learn that certain people aren't even aware of the existence of these benefits. And so this is very unfortunate, and Ms. Dubé spoke to us about an interesting approach in terms of having an awareness campaign. And so in terms of the groups that you study, the marginalized ones that you've mentioned, what is the best way to reach them? Would an awareness campaign need to be a certain way or another? What would you advise?
The best way is to work locally, is to go to the communities, to go to the people with lived experience, but also the frontline grassroots workers that work in those communities, because they see the nuance and the distinctiveness of the issues, and they're the ones that can communicate that best. So I think a campaign that is not only raising awareness, but is led and designed by the communities themselves, very place-based. So local investments, I think, are really, really important. But it's awareness raising, but also literally showing them how to apply. We did a, like I said, a cross-country project where we wanted to show that these groups needed their supporters, their frontline supporters, to show them the application process. But the whole issue of financial literacy with disabled seniors, for example, with the banks, and things like that, online is often not an option. So it really is that frontline knowledge that you need to kind of activate and invest in to build such a campaign.
Je présume de votre réponse.
And I assume based on your answer, but I'll let you tell us one or the other. So yes, awareness in a targeted way to access the various communities, but also support. And you spoke about community organizations. So we need to financially support community organizations.
I think it's the front line, like the really grassroots organizations that have the most access to the most vulnerable senior women that are out there. So Indigenous frontline, not the bigger ones, not the big settlement services, but the really ethno-specific groups, because they're seeing these issues every day. And they also see the way they're interrelated, how financial vulnerability is related to gender-based violence, is related to housing precarity, et cetera. So it's that kind of holistic understanding and knowledge that you really can't get through academics or policy analysts. You really need the people that are seeing it every day to develop the solutions on how to communicate it and how to support senior women in applying and accessing.
So we need a specialized approach. Ms. Hayek, I'm going to turn toward you. You spoke about abuse, and it's always good to alert people about the occurrence of any of these situations. And people in my writing have told me, in terms of financial abuse, there are many gray areas, and there are seniors who have reported things to the organizations that they work with, but then they say, no, my grandson doesn't abuse me. I'm his grandmother, and he needs me. So is some kind of awareness necessary in order to recognize different forms of abuse that have no physical effect?
Thank you for the question. And that is, in fact, what we contend with every single day. There are people that are not aware that what's happening to them is abuse. They are living with the consequences of that, but not necessarily knowing what to do next. The availability of resources within community must change. There is such an inequity in terms of if you live in an urban center, for example, there are all kinds of programs and services available. When you live in a rural environment and you're isolated and live, a kilometer away from your next door neighbor, that poses a problem. The reluctance to.
Thank you. That is all the time we have. Ms. LaRouche, over to you for 2.5 minutes. In Quebec, we've worked with the Seniors Secretariat, and so we've developed things to assist isolated seniors. And a lot of great work has been done in Valcourt. Miss McAuliffe, and our time is running out. So I saw you nodding your head during the questions. So I will let you to perhaps tell us about CURAM. It's quite significant, and sometimes seniors have to wait 9 months. And seniors are having more and more difficulty making ends meet. In the Journal de Montréal, there was an article about seniors having difficulty with housing, and if there's 9 additional months to wait, and if there's no way to assist the seniors affected by CURAM, what kind of impact can this have? Some witnesses have told us that the effects can be really tragic. So what would you say to this? And if you could just provide a summary of your answer.
Yes, that is a bit of the financial literacy. We know that women are less likely to have savings over the course of their lifetime, just another systemic issue. But we are hearing from our representatives from province through province that particularly people who fall short of their rent or deciding whether they're going to eat or pay their rent are often becoming evicted. And I think you've already had that conversation on homelessness, women moving into shelters, or taking in people, creating an unsafe living condition by taking in folks into their homes, which may be taken over, and they think that they're getting care and assistance, but then they end up with losing their home because they've lost possession of their home with a change in their financial status through their home ownership. People get involved in their finances. It takes a very huge toll, and seniors are, as you know, they're very trustworthy, so they're falling into very dark holes when they take in people and have them help them financially. It's not been good results.
Just in a few seconds, and in the case of banks, do you recognize that the federal government should recognize these problems and provide safeguards in collaboration with banks to prevent fraud? And you were nodding your head on this.
Yes. Yes.
Well, Ms. Roberts, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I'm an advocate for seniors, not because I am one, but I really believe that we need to make some changes in this country to ensure that seniors have the opportunity to live in dignity. So my first question is going to be to Ms. Patricia McAuliffe. I hope I pronounced that properly. I apologize if I didn't. We heard earlier from Elizabeth Brown the single seniors tax fairness. And one of the issues that we have from a few of her constituents, two sisters living together, and they've lived together for 50 years. They share a home, and they also take care of one of their, the older senior's son. One of them passes away, and the expenses are still the same. But because they were able to share the expenses of that household, it allowed them to live together and make ends meet, basically, because of the joint income. However, when the sister passes away, she loses that income. She loses any CPP that they contributed to for almost 50 years. Also, she loses the rights of the RIF because it has to go to the estate. It cannot be directed to the individual that she lived with. How can we make that change? What can the government do to identify the fact that single seniors should have the same rights as a couple?
Well, thank you very much. We have actually had presentations made at our convention from the Single Seniors for Tax Fairness, and we support many of their policies for sure. And we recognize the shortfall when a spouse dies, but importantly, this unique story, as though it may be unique, is not unique at all. And I believe that there should be some sort of transition period where the estate then can, access the savings through the RIFs and allow perhaps the individuals still living in that home to utilize that money over a period of, I think, 10 years they were asking. I think we agreed with that as a resolve to the problem. Living arrangements are very different today than they were when a lot of these rules were made. So again, re-looking at the legislation and how it applies to the living conditions of people today. There are cohort living conditions. There are avenues that we can support where, communal living with seniors is happening today. And I think we can better support that in ways that adopt some of the principles of the Single Seniors for Tax Fairness, their recommendations. There can be special measures put aside for individuals, especially in caregiving needs. I think we need to do something.
So the other constituent that I recently spoke with, a different scenario, they were much younger, contributed. Both sisters lived together in their parents' home. They purchased their parents' home. They lived together because of affordability situations. And as we all know, inflation has gone up quite a bit for everyone, especially seniors. One of the sisters dies before the age of 65, so does not get any benefit for the CPP. But the sister who is now having to absorb the cost on her own has to sell the house. She's forced to sell the home because she can't afford it. What happens to that CPP money that the sister has paid for? Why is the other sister not given the same rights as a couple?
Well, I guess it goes back to marital status and the way that our systemic structure is set up to support this, the marital status of individuals. That's deeply rooted in a system.
So do you feel
it's gone? I mean, a CPP stays with the individual. And it's a shared benefit if the person is your spouse or common law partner. Benefits can transition over, but living situations are very different today, and I think our policies and programs need to better reflect that. And I think CPP is very, very wealthy. I think this is the time to look at and support different types of living accommodations.
So do you feel, because we have a lack of benefits for single seniors, do you feel that what can the government do to address this issue for seniors of the same situation that we just discussed? What would your recommendation be to the government?
My recommendation would be to review the statutes of living conditions. I mean, that's the reality. That would be we have to go back to the legislation.
Okay. So I don't know. I don't think I have much time left. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That will be it. Ms. Nathan, you will be our last member to ask questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. And this question is for Dr. Rajan. Much federal social policy is designed using aggregated data that obscure the experiences of subgroups, racialized senior women, Indigenous elders, women with disabilities. So in your research, where have you found the most dangerous gaps between what policy assumes and what these women actually experience? And how should the federal government restructure the data collection to close these gaps?
I think in every area, in terms of elder abuse, every form of abuse, I think there's gaps with these populations. For example, when we look at disabled seniors, the situation. They have more caregivers in their lives, and the abuse is largely committed by their workers who take their checks on a regular basis, use it for their own, control their access to money, etc. But a lot of we don't acknowledge, I think, as my colleague was saying, is the different living situations that which the policies are assumed on, the assumptions of the policies. So I think that's the starting point, is what are the conditions that diverse and distinct senior women are living in. For example, as we talked about already, immigrant women, that's the starting place, because the bottom line is a lot of these groups aren't even getting access to benefits if they know if they're getting them, and I think so how do we prevent that? How do we, prevent a disabled senior who's getting certain kind of government benefits? How do we ensure that they actually get the money, that there isn't other people that are having access to their accounts and controlling that money in different ways? And I think it does go back to recognizing the assumptions that are now antiquated in terms of how the policies and the programs are built.
Thank you. Wage funded your organization specifically to examine systemic changes. Based on the work, is the problem of financial vulnerability among senior women best understood as a failure of individual programs or as a product of the structural systems like tax policy, housing markets that were never designed with these women in mind? What does your answer imply for where the reform energy should be directed at?
It absolutely is. It's a lifespan. It's a life journey of barriers in every area. Some of the senior women that we look at and have studied and participated in a lot of our research have never been participating in the labor market due to their disability, due to being a newcomer, language barriers, et cetera. So right away, that impacts certain kinds of benefits that they would be entitled to in their older age. I think it's extremely important to understand the multitude of barriers and how they interact with each other that create the conditions for financial vulnerability in old age for specific groups.
And for the Indigenous senior women, financial vulnerability often intersects with the colonial legacies, interrupted education, exclusion from pension systems, displacement from land and community, and intergenerational trauma. How should federal anti-poverty and anti-abuse frameworks be specifically redesigned to be responsive to these histories rather than applying a one-size-fits-all senior women lens?
Again, I think it goes back just the diversity within Indigenous people, not even in terms of nations, but location, if they're urban, if they're rural, what kinds of, how does it interact with other legislations that they interface with? I think it has to come from the local level with Indigenous groups kind of leading the way. Indigenous women, particularly seniors, have a greater responsibility to look after larger in terms of what we would call extended family, but again, from more collectivist communities, that's their responsibility. So how does that impact, their lives? What does that look like when you're on?
Merci, Madame.
Thank you.
Merci. Voilà.
Thank you. That is all the time we have for questions. Thank you very much for making yourselves available today. Just as a reminder, on Thursday, we're going to have our last group of witnesses for the first hour as a part of this study. And the second hour, we will continue reviewing the draft report that we started working on, the criminal code and 810, and also on anti-feminist ideology. Yes. I'd just like to confirm with respect to the 810 report, we just needed to take a look at observation 2. Is that right? Yes. Thank you. Thank you for your attention and for your participation. Thank you for everyone who's helped me make this easy today. It's the will of the committee that we adjourn the meeting. Meeting adjourned.